we had presidential candidates who stood on a stage and were asked, would you accept a budget package, a deficit reduction plan that involved $10 of cuts for every dollar in revenue increases? 10-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to revenue. Not one of them raised their hand. Think about that. Ronald Reagan, who, as I recall, is not accused of being a tax and spend socialist, understood repeatedly that when the deficit started to get out of control, that for him to make a deal, he would have to propose both spending cuts and tax increases. Did it multiple times. He could not get through a Republican primary today.
Now, that was the president yesterday speaking before an AP gathering in Washington, and he had a lot of subjects here. But let's get into what he said about if Reagan were alive today, he wouldn't be able to make it through a Republican primary.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if anybody at home can
really?
Go, yeah. I mean,
really?
Absolutely. Look at who is going to win the Republican primary. The moderate. Who won the Republican primary 4 years ago?
The moderate has been bent like a pretzel to fit into the conservative far, far right that he's not going to be able to pull back in time for the general election.
Same thing as the far, far left in the Democratic primary. It's always going to happen that way. Who's winning the primary is the moderate. Mitt Romney's winning the primary.
The only thing I'd say, Bill, is we heard talks about purity tests. We've heard talked about there's the litmus test, and then obviously with the advent of the Tea Party, this has gotten louder. There's a lot of graphics that we're going to show people about what Reagan did that would be heresy right now, like raising taxes, et cetera.
Yeah, and talk
of compromise. Imagine sitting down with a Democrat over drinks right now. I mean, Boehner would be strung up in, if he did something like that.
But that was in office with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic Congress. He went in, there's a Republican president with Democrats in both houses. He did what he had to do to move things forward. That's a good president.
The conservatives of 1980 are today's moderates. I think Reagan would be fighting with Obama for the Democratic nomination
Not
right
a
now.
chance.
Richard Nixon wouldn't be allowed to say the word Republican at this point. He'd be cast off as a socialist.
Anybody at home can Google in Rendezvous with Destiny speech with Reagan. If an elected official or a candidate emerged that could give a speech like Ronald Reagan did,
I don't think
he would be
debate.
instantly in the front runner.
I don't think anyone's going to debate. Reagan was conservative, okay, in a lot of ways. But Reagan was not so opposed to compromise, maybe out of necessity, but also the whole big tent philosophy. Remember that? The whole, the idea that thou shalt not attack a fellow Republican. Today, look at what, as Dominic said, Mitt Romney has become. I mean, his biggest, I think, challenge in the general, you can disagree with me, is he's going to have to explain who he really is because he's so contorted himself as to, is he pro-life one day, is he pro-choice the other day? Why,
But same thing with George Bush Sr., who initially was pro-choice and then became pro-life to run for president.
But it's more than that. This is about
there are more issues on the table.
But if you did the Pepsi challenge, didn't say who you were talking about and listed their policies when it comes to raising taxes, when it comes to Republican voters would not vote for Ronald Reagan. They absolutely wouldn't.
I disagree. I think they'd go for Ronald Reagan in a heartbeat.
You love the man, but his policies, could they fly in 2012?
I mean, even Reagan got criticism in the White House from National Reviews, from other conservatives, for doing compromises. I mean, he got hit then too. But I think as a candidate, he'd be head and shoulders above anybody out there today again. But as a leader, he compromised. We need more of that in Washington. I mean, it has to happen. It's required.
Given this, he was right about the Berlin Wall.